Most men don't announce it when they've moved on. There's no declaration, no final message, no fireworks, just a quiet shift, barely visible on the surface but unmistakable in presence. A conversation that doesn't get answered, a glance that no longer seeks approval, a silence that isn't waiting anymore. She won't hear the door close, but one day she'll feel the absence of your weight, and she won't know when it happened. That's how men move on, not through performance, but disappearance. And this video isn't about her, not really. It's not about what she does when you stop orbiting her world. It's about what her reactions reveal, about the man you were and the man you've become. Because when a man reclaims his silence, he doesn't just change the relationship, he changes the atmosphere. She feels it, even if she can't name it. She sees it, even if she pretends not to. And when she reacts, that reaction is a mirror, a reflection not of your absence, but of her loss of influence. Zeno of Citium didn't start a war when he lost everything. He didn't chase what slipped through his fingers. He walked into a bookstore, and from that quiet space of loss, Stoicism was born. That's what this is. Not revenge, not strategy, but reconstruction. After a storm, the strongest structures aren't loud, they're simply still standing. That's you now, not louder, just still. Epictetus said, "It is not events that disturb us, but our view of them." When she begins to act differently, when the sweet tone returns, when the surveillance starts, when the regret appears, understand, it's not you that shifted. It's her illusion of control that collapsed. The idea that you'd always explain yourself, that you'd always be there to fix the emotional fallout, that you'd come back eventually. That illusion is gone now, and she's not reacting to your new self. She's reacting to the fact that she no longer knows who she's dealing with. Her confusion isn't about losing a boyfriend, a husband, or a companion. It's about losing access, losing power, losing certainty, because what used to provoke you now gets no reply. What used to draw you in now finds a closed door. What used to wound you now passes through you like wind through stone. That's not coldness, that's presence. Your presence, rebuilt, reclaimed, and finally, respected. She once dismissed what you offered, but now, that dismissal echoes in the empty space where your voice used to be. And that echo, it's not asking her to return. It's reminding her what she lost. Not because you needed her to see it, but because she no longer can unsee it. That's the paradox of masculine rebirth. You don't move on to punish. You move on because you finally remembered your own weight. You finally remembered what it feels like to come home to yourself. There was a time when silence meant tension, when you didn't speak because you were trying not to explode, or because you didn't know how to explain the ache in your chest. But now, your silence doesn't beg. It doesn't linger. It doesn't plead to be understood. It simply is. That's what she never expected, that you would stop needing her validation, her clarity, her apology. Because for so long, your silence was still connected to her. It was the silence of someone waiting to be seen. Now it's the silence of someone who already sees. You used to explain. You used to over-explain. Every emotional shift, every quiet frustration, every moment you felt disrespected. You tried to make her understand. You thought that if she just saw it, just heard it the way you felt it, she'd change. But she didn't, because she didn't have to. You were still there, still explaining, still hoping, still performing your pain like it might finally buy you peace. But when a man finds peace within, explanations become unnecessary. He doesn't share his pain to be understood, because he already understands it. He doesn't raise his voice to be heard, because he no longer needs to be. That's the shift. The silence becomes solid. Not passive-aggressive, not distant, not manipulative, just sovereign. And that shift, it rattles her. Because now she realizes your silence isn't a question, it's a boundary. She senses it, not in what you say, but in what you no longer respond to. The text she once used to trigger a reaction now floats unanswered. The looks she gave, the games she played, they fall flat, because there's nothing left in you that needs her reaction, nothing left that needs her recognition. And for the first time, she's the one who feels unseen. Behavioral psychology doesn't need to explain this. You've lived it. The one who once dominated the emotional field through guilt, withdrawal, or seduction feels powerless when her audience no longer claps, when the man she once silenced no longer listens, and not because he's angry, not because he's punishing, but because he's finally grounded. finally home, finally done. This isn't about revenge, it's about emotional sovereignty. You no longer ask her to hold space for your pain, because now your pain has matured into presence. And that presence doesn't chase, it simply remains, quiet, whole, unshakable. When a man begins to withdraw, a shift occurs, not just in her behavior, but in her tone. The same woman who once criticized your emotional needs, who once dismissed your silence as moodiness, or called your boundaries too much, now speaks softly. She compliments. She reminisces. She smiles in a way she hasn't in months. And for a moment, you wonder, is this love returning? Is this healing? No, it's not love. It's re-engagement. Because love, real love, doesn't wait until silence threatens its comfort to soften. Real love doesn't respond only when presence is at risk. What you're witnessing now is not reconciliation, it's reaction. Not because she suddenly sees your worth, but because she's starting to feel the weight of your absence, and it unsettles her, because for the first time, she's no longer certain where you stand. The human brain resists being quietly replaced. Cognitive dissonance sets in when the man she once had predictable access to no longer follows the script. She expected your loyalty to outlast her indifference. She expected your patience to endure her silence. She expected your love to hold on, even when she let go. And now that you're not holding on, her mind scrambles to re-establish order, not because she wants you back, but because she doesn't want to lose control. Her kindness now is a test, a gentle knock on a door she used to barge through. She wants to see if you'll answer, if you'll soften, if you'll break your silence. And if you do, if you take her kindness at face value, if you interpret her warmth as awakening, she'll know she still has access. She may not even be aware of it consciously, but emotionally, she's checking if her presence still shapes yours. This is why Stoicism is critical, not the performance of being unbothered, but the practice of discernment, the ability to feel everything and still respond with clarity. You don't need to harden, you just need to see through. See through the smile that arrives too late. See through the sudden interest that wasn't there when you were at your lowest. See through the sweetness that smells more like strategy than sincerity. Don't interpret her softness as surrender. It's not confession, it's calculation. And the man who has truly moved on doesn't react to tone, he responds to truth. Not the truth in her words, but the truth in her timing. And timing never lies. Because love that only appears when your silence threatens her control was never love at all. It was comfort, it was power, and now it's slipping, which is why she's suddenly so kind. At first she doesn't reach out, she just watches, quietly, indirectly. A mutual friend mentions your name. A song you used to play appears on her story. You haven't posted in weeks, but somehow she still knows where you were last night. There's no confrontation, no apology, no direct contact, but the energy is back, not through presence, but through observation. Because distance doesn't stop curiosity. In fact, it sharpens it. She isn't trying to reconnect. She's trying to read you, to scan for signs that you're still within emotional reach. That maybe, just maybe, you're still bleeding. That your silence is a phase. That you're still posting things meant for her. Still listening for her steps. Still healing in ways that keep her relevant. That's the quiet power of surveillance. It's not done out of malice. It's done out of fear. Fear that you're truly gone. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. You stopped responding, you stopped explaining, and more importantly, you stopped being visible. And that invisibility unsettles her, because if she can't see your pain, she can't measure her influence. So she stalks, quietly, emotionally, through people, through digital footprints, through silent questions asked in louder ways. She wants to know if you've moved on, or if you're just pretending to. There's a story that plays out in many men's lives. A man lets go, not with words, but with absence. He no longer texts, no longer posts, no longer defends his side of the story. And slowly, without warning, she begins to notice. Her curiosity ignites, and what was once silence becomes signal. She starts watching, not to understand you, but to find evidence that she still matters. Not to heal with you, but to make sure you haven't healed without her. But here's the truth. When a man stops defending himself, it's not because he gave up. It's because the wound closed. Not violently, not bitterly, just naturally. Like a body finally deciding it no longer needs to fight infection. And once that wound becomes scar, the games no longer matter. The views, the check-ins, the quiet glances, they lose their meaning. Because she's watching for signs that you still bleed, and you're not bleeding anymore. Zeno didn't rebuild his life to prove anything to the past. He rebuilt because the past no longer had power. That's the mark of a man who's done explaining, done performing, done bleeding in public. Surveillance doesn't move him, not because he doesn't feel, but because he's already felt it all, and now he sees clearly. And what he sees doesn't require attention. It requires distance. She may watch, but he no longer plays to the crowd. It never starts as a direct challenge. It starts subtly, a question loaded with past emotion. A message that seems innocent but carries an old tone. A look, one you remember from when things were breaking, not yet broken. It's not reconciliation, it's confrontation, but it's dressed in familiarity. She doesn't want to fight. She wants to feel something. She wants to know if she still stirs the water you've now made still. She's not asking to understand. She's asking to see, to measure, to observe what remains of your old self. Because if you react, if you flinch, defend, accuse, or explain, then she knows. You're still in it. You're still tangled. Still tied to the old emotional contract that said she could pull you back in any time she wanted. That confrontation isn't about the surface topic. It's about access, about emotional leverage. To her, silence was never neutral. It was either a pause before engagement or a threat of detachment. But now that your silence is steady, consistent, calm, she doesn't trust it. It feels foreign, unreachable, and that emotional distance, for someone used to proximity, can feel unbearable. So she'll test you, not to hurt you, but to confirm if the old power is still intact. Maybe she brings up the past. Maybe she accuses you of things she once ignored. Maybe she claims you've changed, as if that's a flaw. What matters is not the content of what she says. What matters is why she says it. Because emotional dependence doesn't want peace. It wants predictability. And when peace means you're no longer predictable, confrontation becomes the next best option. Chaos feels safer than uncertainty to a mind that never learned to let go gently. Your reaction is her thermometer, not because she wants a fight, but because she wants a read. The more you stay composed, the more your response comes from grounded clarity rather than wounded ego. The more she realizes the door is closed, not locked out of spite, just no longer in use. This is where Stoic masculinity reveals its highest power, not in denying pain, not in suppressing anger, but in governing response, in standing still when everything in you is being provoked to prove something. Because you have nothing to prove. You already proved it when you stopped engaging in cycles that broke you, when you chose inner clarity over external validation. Let her confront, let her provoke, let her test. That's not your battleground anymore. Your war is over. Not because you won, but because you left the field. And she'll feel that more than any words you could ever say. There comes a moment after you've gone quiet, when the very things she once ridiculed begin to appear in her. The routines you kept, the philosophies you lived by, the discipline she once rolled her eyes at. Slowly, almost unnaturally, she begins to reflect the man she once didn't understand. She quotes lines about strength. She shares posts about emotional maturity. She speaks of healing, growth, presence. But it feels rehearsed, like she's borrowing someone else's script. This isn't respect, it's survival. Because when influence is lost, imitation becomes the fallback. If she can no longer command your attention, she tries to match your evolution. Not from admiration, but from necessity, from fear. Fear that she's being left behind, not just by you, but by the version of herself that could stand beside a man like the one you've become. She sees the way others now respond to you, the calm in your eyes, the weight in your silence, and she feels her grip slipping. Not because you pushed her away, but because she didn't walk with you. She stayed still while you grew. She laughed while you studied. She disconnected while you rebuilt. And now, she mimics the form, hoping it still buys her a seat at the table. But transformation doesn't echo, it radiates. You can feel when change is lived and when it's performed. Her words may match yours now. Her actions may look familiar, but something's missing. Consistency, conviction, roots. Because real growth doesn't arrive as reaction. It arrives in solitude, in silence, in stillness, the same place you went when she wasn't looking. And you will feel the temptation to believe it, to trust it, to welcome it, Because the version of her that stands before you now looks like the woman you always hoped she'd be. But timing tells truth, and if she only became that when you walked away, then she's not becoming, she's adapting. That's why you don't engage based on appearance. You watch, quietly, respectfully, not to punish but to preserve what you've rebuilt. Because the man you are now knows the cost of premature forgiveness, of quick returns, of shallow peace. Let her mirror, let her post, let her speak the words you once said alone. But don't move until you see depth. Not in tone, in time. Because a man who found himself through pain cannot afford to lose himself in performance. Your stillness taught you everything. Now let it protect you. There will be a moment, perhaps late at night, perhaps in the quiet space between her new posts, when she reaches out, not with anger, not with pride, but with guilt. A message, a call, a memory shared as if it still holds meaning. Her voice softer, her words slower, and for a second your heart stirs. Because regret is powerful. It sounds honest. It looks like closure. It feels like maybe, just maybe, she finally sees what you went through. But not all regret is real. Some of it is theater. Some of it is timed. Some of it only appears when she realizes you've stopped waiting. When your silence isn't a pause, it's a decision. That's when guilt surfaces. Not to heal, but to reset. To restore an emotional rhythm that once gave her certainty. It's not always malicious, but it's not always clean either. Because guilt can be used as a lever, a way to pull you back into dialogue, into vulnerability, into the space where she once had reach. Real remorse is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a script or audience. It shows up in changed behavior, in humility, without expectation, in actions repeated over time, not sentiments performed once. But what you'll often encounter instead is a louder kind of regret, one that's wrapped in emotion, but empty of reflection. One that wants forgiveness without accountability. One that weeps without truly understanding why it hurt you in the first place. You'll hear things like, "I miss what we had," or "I didn't know what I had until it was gone." But those aren't admissions of guilt. They're expressions of discomfort, of loss, of unfamiliar emptiness. And that emptiness isn't about you. It's about the space your silence created. A space where her voice no longer shapes your mood, where her validation no longer defines your identity. That's why discernment is essential. You're not a cold man. You feel deeply, but you've learned not to act on every feeling, especially when those feelings arrive too late. Nostalgia will whisper to you. It will replay old laughter, old tenderness. But nostalgia doesn't carry weight. Only patterns do. And the pattern now tells you, you've already done your part, quietly, fully, with presence, with love. Don't confuse her guilt with growth. Don't confuse emotion with evolution. Let her feel what she feels, but don't step back into the fire just because she now sees the ashes. Some things burn down because they were never built on truth, and the man you've become doesn't rebuild where the foundation was never sacred. He honors the ruin, and then he walks. There's a quiet shift she never anticipated. It doesn't come with a final message or a dramatic exit. It doesn't arrive in anger or through some declaration of independence. It shows up in your energy, in your eyes, in the way your shoulders no longer carry conversations that should have ended long ago. She feels it, not because you said goodbye, but because you stopped waiting for one. Closure was once your anchor. You needed to understand. You needed to know why it fell apart, why she changed, why love became obligation and attention turned into silence. You stayed longer than you should have, not because you were weak, but because you were hoping for an honest ending, a clean page, a final truth. But some stories don't close, they fade. And what matters isn't how they end, it's how you walk away without them. When she sees that you're no longer circling that wound, no longer checking the door, no longer rereading old messages, something in her breaks, because her power wasn't just in her presence. It was in your pursuit, in your longing, in the weight you gave her absence. And now, that weight is gone. You don't speak her name with heat. You don't hold her memory with tension. You don't need her to explain anything anymore. You've accepted what she never had the courage to say. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, but in moments like this, the deepest form of revenge is not even desiring an apology. Not because you're above it, but because you've outgrown the need for it. You've built peace where she once left confusion. You've planted stillness where she sowed doubt. And that transformation didn't come through confrontation. It came through detachment. Now, when she reaches out, if she does, it won't be to offer what you once begged for. It'll be to reclaim a piece of herself she lost when you stopped orbiting her emotions. She may cry, she may plead, she may invoke memories, touch old wounds, speak with a softness you remember from better days, but none of it moves you anymore. Not because you've hardened, but because you've healed. That's the liberation, not becoming indifferent, but becoming whole. So whole that no apology can add or subtract from your peace. So whole that silence is no longer a waiting room. It's your home. When she realizes you no longer need closure, she'll understand. You didn't walk away to escape her. You walked away because you finally returned to yourself. And nothing pulls you from that place again. Zeno of Citium lost everything. Not just possessions, but direction. Yet he didn't collapse. He didn't seek to recover what was taken. He walked into a bookstore, quietly, and from that silence, Stoicism was born. He didn't rebuild the world that failed him. He rebuilt the man within it. That's what you've done. You didn't reclaim her. You reclaimed your clarity. And in that clarity, you found something stronger than revenge. Peace. Seneca once said, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. And for the man who stayed too long, who gave too much, who believed even when it cost him his voice, walking away isn't weakness. It's courage. Staying away, that's strength. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. The kind that speaks without sound. The kind that doesn't return, even when the door is wide open. You didn't move on to be seen. You moved on because you finally saw yourself. And now that you've returned to your center, the world around you shifts. She feels it, not as punishment, but as absence. A sacred absence. The kind that can't be replaced. The kind that can't be touched. Because you didn't just walk away. You remembered who you were before you started begging to be understood. Let that be your closure. Not her words, not her regret, but your silence. That grounded, steady, dignified silence. The one that says, I am still here. I am no longer waiting. I am whole.